Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato sama sambuddhassa. Buddhang dhammang sanghang namasami. Continuing on with Payutto's book, Buddhadhamma, Chapter 11, Happiness. And this is continuing on where Ajahn left off. So it's page 893. It's a review of different forms of happiness. I'm going to skip over to page 894 because he just has a list of different classifications, and I'll read his summary and then going into a few essays, which are quite nice. A classification according to different types of individuals appears this way. 1. Unawakened human beings enjoy sense pleasure and may experience the happiness of jhana. 2. Awakened beings at the stage of stream entry and once returning experience sense pleasure, the happiness of jhana, and the happiness of nibbana in the form of happiness of fruition attainment. 3. Awakened beings at the stage of non-returning in arhatship experience the happiness of jhana and the happiness of nibbana, both in the form of the happiness of fruition attainment, and if they have reached the 8 concentrative attainments, in the form of happiness of the attainment of cessation. So that's like unawakened beings, patujanas, will seek sense pleasures and also can possibly experience jhana. Stream enters, once returners, will still be prone to possibly seek sense pleasures because greed, hatred, and delusion has only been attenuated but not gotten rid of. So they might seek sense pleasures, but they also have the happiness of jhana and the fruition attainments. But then for non-returners and arhants, because greed, hatred, and delusion are done away with, and only these subtle bonds into the fetters, the sangyojana, remain, then a non-returner or an arhat won't be interested at all in seeking sense pleasure, so that will be done away with. But they have the attainments of the jhanas and fruition attainments, and also the ability to do cessation of perception and feeling as a concentration practice. Although Buddhism does not encourage people to act solely for the sake of obtaining happiness, it constantly acknowledges the truth that happiness is an essential aspect of human life and gives meaning to Dhamma practice. One can say that it is an anchor and support for Dhamma practice. Regardless of whether one is focusing on Dhamma practice in particular or on human conduct in general, the happiness meant here is the basic happiness inherent in people's minds, which they can contact by themselves at any time that they are ready. They need not rely on contact with objects in the outside world. This happiness brings a degree of independence to one's life. The vital importance of happiness in Dhamma practice has been explained above. Note, in particular, that a Dhamma practitioner who has not yet experienced a deeper happiness, independent of sense objects, cannot yet be assured that he or she won't return to seek out sense pleasures. Even as a renunciate, if one has not yet experienced this profound non-material happiness, one is not yet safe. The mental defilements can overwhelm the mind, leading one to relinquish the holy life. The Buddha encouraged unawakened people to develop this internal, non-material happiness. Besides increasing one's degree of happiness and enhancing the quality of one's life, this internal happiness provides an escape from the tyranny of craving, which leads to endless agitation and heightened problems, both personal and social. It is fair to say that if human beings are not willing to take an interest in and get to know this non-material happiness, the unrestrained rush for sense pleasure will create a superficial kind of life, full of distress, anxiety, boredom, grief, and misery. Moreover, it will be accompanied by competitiveness and mutual exploitation until people lead themselves and the entire world to utter annihilation. Given that ordinary, unawakened people who are immersed in the pursuit of sense pleasure need to experience an inner happiness, it is twice as important that those people who determine to distance themselves from or to renounce sense pleasure have access to such happiness. This is even more true for those individuals who go forth as renunciates, who engage in higher spiritual practice, or who devote their lives to some ideal. If they are unable to access such internal happiness, their renunciation or devotion will fail to have a stable protection. It is likely that they will fall away from their ideal and return to an unwholesome mode of living. In short, if one lives a life of renunciation, one must be happy with renunciation. If one devotes oneself to an ideal, one must be happy about a life of devotion. In a wider context, if we are unsuccessful at helping people to recognize and appreciate this internal happiness, the craving for sense pleasure will overwhelm the human race. It will be the final factor in determining the fate of the world, regardless of the undertakings by religious leaders and moral philosophers. Next section, 9, happiness and ethics. Very often, when people talk about religion or religious practice, they use the expression religion and ethics. The development of happiness is inextricably linked to improving one's life, to improving society, and to developing other aspects of spiritual practice. In this context, it is necessary to state that the development of happiness is equivalent to the development of ethics, and conversely, ethical development is equivalent to the cultivation of happiness. If one can understand this connection, then one will understand the true meaning both of ethics and of happiness. When people hear the word ethics or morality, they often get the sense of acting against one's will. For example, when speaking about ethics, people often think of needing to refrain from certain harmful or evil behavior, which gives the sense of force or constraint. In truth, ethical development is one aspect of developing happiness. True ethics belongs to the ethics of happiness. If ethics is merely a system of going against one's will, or is tied up with suffering, then it is not true ethics. It will not lead to true success. This is not to say that ethics does not involve some form of constraint and self-control. It does involve constraint, of which there are two kinds. A. Early stages of practice may involve some constraint, in the same way that positive growth may require the removal of negative qualities. Yet when one enters the correct path and one's ethical conduct is true, growth is unhindered. Negative qualities fall away, and one need not spend time removing them. Positive qualities increase to the state of completion, at which point one's life is fully devoted to sharing goodness with others. B. The second form of constraint is related to personal disposition. There are some people referred to as engaging in difficult, arduous practice, dukkha patipada, whose disposition is to be forceful in practice. Yet their willingness and eagerness for constraint leads to self-discipline. Instead of suffering about constraint, they delight in training. They have the potential to grow and succeed. Ethics overlaps with spiritual training. According to the Buddha's teachings, human beings require spiritual training. They only reach excellence and nobility by way of training. Spiritual training is equivalent to spiritual development. People reach spiritual success by way of training themselves. This is an aspect of human nature. One cannot progress by simply following one's raw instincts. For this reason, one can see that spiritual training is linked to human nature. People can only grow and prosper by engaging in spiritual training. If spiritual training unfolds correctly, it must be endowed with happiness, and it must be a training of happiness. If people are unhappy while engaging in such practice, it can be assumed that they are not training correctly. When people engage in spiritual training, their lives undergo development and increase in virtue and wholesomeness. This life of virtue and rectitude is referred to as ethical conduct, Caryadhamma. There's a note on this word Charyadhamma that it's only found in the Thai language. But there's the next chapter, The Path as the Holy Life, chapter 12, where he goes into defining that term more, apparently. Ethics and spiritual training thus must go hand in hand. In fact, one need not use the term must here, because when people practice correctly, these two elements naturally proceed in unison. When people engage in correct spiritual training, their lives improve and they experience greater happiness. Spiritual training is thus a cultivation in happiness. Moreover, every aspect of a person's life will be well developed. It is in this way that these factors are connected. Spiritual training is the development of happiness. Spiritual training is equivalent to ethical development. Development in ethics is the cultivation of happiness, etc. It is as the Buddha said, if one attends to the correct causes and conditions, one need not make an appeal. The dynamics of nature will proceed automatically. When rapture, piti, arises, the body and mind are refreshed and relaxed. One need not ask for this to happen, or even to have this intention. Relaxation, passaddhi, then follows naturally, according to things being just so. If a mother hen wishes for chicks to hatch, she incubates the eggs. At the proper time, the chicks peck through the eggshell and emerge. Yet, if the hen does not sit on the eggs, despite clucking loudly all day in front of the coop, her efforts will be in vain, the eggs will rot, and no chicks will appear. I thought that was just a brilliant analogy. It's kind of like talking about practice rather than doing it. Soon after the Second World War, technology was not as advanced as it is today, and before people could get in a car and drive, and before people could just get in a car and drive away, they would have to use all their strength to turn the hand crank. Sometimes they would be utterly exhausted by the time the engine turned over. Nowadays, however, one only need to turn one's fingers an inch on the ignition and the engine starts. Here we see both the connection and the distinction between human processes and the processes of nature. If we are to benefit from the processes of nature, then we must seek ways for them to complement human activities. The amount of strain and difficulty we experience depends on how well we can link our activities to natural processes and have these take over for us. If people are able to set up their activities effectively and to link them with dynamics of nature, they will abide in joy and at ease. And if people can accomplish this, they will not have to act against their will. There will be no need for other people or for the government to exert pressure on them to act. Our responsibility is simply to discern causes and conditions and then respond to them correctly. We need neither appeal to things to be a specific way nor to resist them. There are some people who, rather than resist the processes of nature, try to regulate their desires. They wholeheartedly practice self-restraint, and this restraint eventually becomes a form of self-training. This is another natural unfolding. Spiritual training is a way of developing people in happiness and in other virtuous qualities. When they live a virtuous life, they live an ethical life. This is how ethics and training are defined in Buddhism. Here we use the term Buddhism simply as a means for communication. If Buddhism teaches the truth, then it teaches nature. It teaches how things exist naturally, how things exist according to their own nature. A simple definition for Buddhism is thus a teaching of natural truths. In sum, for spiritual training or ethical development to be true and effective, it must include a cultivation of happiness. Spiritual training and ethical development are synonymous with the development of happiness. If spiritual training is still accompanied by a lack of enthusiasm and resistance, one will be unable to experience happiness. This is not genuine training, and its associated ethical discipline will be endowed with force and compulsion. Likewise, this is not true ethical conduct. The next section is called human regulations, and a system of preconditions. Many people harbor the misunderstanding that by inciting craving and increasing greed, people will work harder in order to obtain consumable goods. They claim that such excess will spur the economy and lead to greater wealth for all. At first glance, this appears to be true, but these people do not see things correctly and are thus mistaken. Thinking in this way reveals a certain intelligence in engaging with craving within a system of preconditions. Yet, however skilled one is in manipulating craving, it is almost impossible that such a method of thinking will create someone like Albert Einstein. The best it can do is produce technocrats working in business economics who may create excitement or alarm as a result of their research, which is often not of great consequence. For problems to be truly solved, people need to possess wholesome enthusiasm to match their intelligence. Take a simple example from everyday life of looking after one's physical body. One person endowed with wholesome enthusiasm, chanda, cares for his body, wishing for it to be strong, healthy, and clean. Another person, subject to craving, is prone to laziness and does not normally show concern for the body. Later, when craving kicks in and they want to appear enticing to someone else, they will try to make themselves as physically attractive as possible. Which of these two forms of behavior will be more conducive to the well-being of the body? Now let us turn our attention to the system of preconditions required for engagement with craving. Earlier, a distinction between the process of wholesome desire and the process of craving was described. In the process of craving, a fixed sense of self or self-identity arises. Now we come to a second distinction. When craving acts as the motivation for action, it creates a system of preconditions that act as the driving force for society. It is also the mechanism behind unsustainable development. When craving arises, people want to consume something. But when the object has not yet been obtained, they look for ways to acquire it. Here, things do not unfold according to the process of causes and conditions, but rather they link up with a set of preconditions. People may object here and say, craving is also a desire for action. But this is not so. Craving prefers idleness. Craving wishes to consume, to obtain, to acquire. But if the desired object has not yet been obtained, what can one do? Here one must accord with the stipulation, in order to get this, one must do that. One cannot obtain the desired object without acting in this particular way. This is how craving prompts activity within a system of preconditions. I thought that was a very interesting, important point, that craving, the ultimate end that craving wants is idleness or say, indulgence, but sometimes there's certain preconditions. We'll do the bare minimum in order to fulfill that particular craving. Here one acts not out of wholesome enthusiasm, but because the action is a prerequisite for obtaining something. As the action is not a response to a true wish to act, the person does not experience happiness. There is not a wholehearted desire to act, and so the action is accompanied by suffering. Craving only spurs action because of preconditions. If one does not act, one does not obtain the desired object, the consumption of which provides happiness. The act itself, however, is done begrudgingly, and one does not know how long one must wait in order to obtain the object and to fulfill gratification. The entire waiting process is filled with suffering. The long wait in order to obtain an object of gratification produces stress. In the end, this process is unsustainable, and rather than leading to true development, it leads to stress. Unsustainable development results in a perpetual state of stress. With wholesome enthusiasm, on the other hand, one wishes to act in order to bring about improvement. One acts with the constant desire to act, and one is thus happy throughout the duration of the deed. One experiences no boredom or stress. This happiness is inherent to this process. It results directly from the existing causes and conditions. This principle applies to one's studies, one's work, indeed to all of one's activities. If one acts with wholesome enthusiasm, one will find success and happiness throughout. Wholesome enthusiasm, chanda, is essential. The Buddha compared it to the light of the dawn. Just like the golden light of the dawn is the precursor to the rising of the sun, so too, if one is endowed with wholesome enthusiasm, it can be expected that one will flourish in spiritual training and in the Noble Eightfold Path. The dynamic of wholesome enthusiasm does not require a lengthy explanation because it follows a natural process according with causes and conditions. Things become complicated because of an overlapping system of preconditions set up by human beings. Human beings nowadays are almost entirely dependent on a system based on preconditions. They have used their intelligence to establish conventional measures overlapping with natural laws in order to obtain results based on specific prerequisites. Natural laws, laws of conditionality, exist inherent in nature. Conventional laws are created and subscribed to by human beings in order to meet and proceed according to specific preconditions. These two overlapping laws play an important role in modern civilization. An example of this pertains to the domain of work. Imagine a government complex, for example, a state university, with spacious grounds and elegant buildings. People wish for this to be a place of delight, to have fresh, green lawns and parks with various species of flowering shrubs. How should one fulfill this desire? Here, people use their intelligence to divide the labor and create a system of agreed-upon standards. We know that trees, plants, and grass thrive when they receive the proper nourishment and nutrients, including water and fertilizer. This pertains to natural causes and conditions, to fixed laws of nature. Knowing this, people then consider how they can propel or induce these natural causes and conditions. Here is where people establish an overlapping set of rules and criteria. Human laws are conventional truths, sammati. They are agreements based on mutual knowledge and recognition. The Pali term sammati refers to a shared understanding combined with a mutual agreement and acknowledgement. Human laws are based on mutual contracts and agreements. For example, one may hire a person for $250 a month to be a gardener in order to water and prune the plants, work the soil, remove the weeds, etc., in order for the park to be a place of beauty and delight. Here rules, i.e., a set of criteria, have been established. The work as a gardener is a precise and definite cause, producing the effect of receiving a monthly salary. The salary appears to be the clear result of working as a gardener. In fact, there are two overlapping laws at work here. 1. Laws of nature. The plants will only grow if there is a sufficiency of various factors, like fertilizer and water. These laws are certain and absolute. 2. Human laws. These are secondary laws established to induce the various factors required for the dynamics of nature. These are conventions, regulations, or laws established to create a position of gardener funded by a monthly salary. These human laws deal with human factors. The factors pertaining to human laws help to propel the factors inherent in nature so that they proceed in a way that fulfills the desires of human beings. But as mentioned above, human laws are based on conventional agreements. They are not certain and definite like natural laws. They can be altered, distorted, or subject to manipulation and deceit. For example, the employer may not honor the agreement and only give the person $200 per month instead of $250. If the gardener does not consent, he may need to dispute this matter or file a formal complaint. Conversely, the employee may not dedicate himself to the work and instead go off to sleep or go drinking with his friends. Come the end of the month, he demands his salary, but he has not acted in accord with the laws of nature. Here, although he receives $250 or even $300, there is no way for the plants to thrive. Of these two overlapping sets of laws, human laws are subject to distortion. People may not follow through with their promises and agreements. The result is that people get into arguments and are caught up in the stipulations attached to these conventional laws. Such human conventions can thus potentially cause all sorts of problems. They are not truly reliable. The essence of human laws does not rest with the laws themselves, but rather with people. If one wants these laws to be successful, one needs to train people to be honest. In the end, the essential factor is education. People need to learn to love the truth and to abide in honesty. Human laws are based on a system of preconditions. If one works for 1 month as a gardener, one receives $250. This appears to be a clearly defined cause and effect. But what does a closer examination reveal? Working for a month as a gardener cannot in itself produce a salary of $250. The money only comes by way of a proviso. This is an example of a provisional system or a system of preconditions. Some people will only do the work in order to fulfill the preconditions. One may do the gardening work simply to receive the salary, but in one's heart, one has no desire for the plants to prosper and grow. If the gardener only desires the results of the human stipulations and is not interested in the direct results of the natural laws, he is not endowed with wholesome desire. He is not interested in the welfare of the plants. He is prompted not by wholesome enthusiasm, but by craving, tanha. He only wants the money. Craving is the driving force leading the person to act according to the terms within the agreed-upon conventions. If the gardener has no true desire for the plants to flourish, he will not love his work. Rather, he will have to force himself to work. The work will thus be burdened with a sense of suffering. This is one of the vital problems for people in the present age. As civilization develops, people's suffering increases. People's work, activities, and education is beset by suffering because they are caught up in the system of preconditions. They are caught up in a system of craving. I'll end there for today. I just thought that was a really brilliant essay.
It was nice to hear Payutto echo something I've heard Longpa say before, which is this idea of judging the effectiveness of our practice based on how it affects our well-being. Because, at least for me, and probably for some others, there's a tendency to get carried away with this idea of dukkha that leads to the end of dukkha. So, coming back to how is this actually affecting my well-being, that's been very helpful for me.
To be careful with that one.
Yeah, as you were reading about ethics being linked to happiness, I was thinking of reading Ajahn Buddhadhamma gave last year about a monk getting to the point of suicide and then becoming enlightened as he picked up the knife, thinking, this year's readings are a lot more pleasant. Nice to be hearing about happiness.
But you remember that one.
It's indeed better. No disrespect.
No. Come at it from all angles. The stick and the carrot.
But I can see how we can do that in our own practice, like the tanha versus chanda. Like I've done that many times before where I'm just sort of I can't think of any concrete examples, but just practicing with tanha rather than chanda in terms of wanting to get the end result rather than plant the natural causes and conditions in the present. And it's a very interesting dichotomy, difference.
I've been a little skeptical, but maybe I haven't experienced it myself, but the idea of if one's practicing the right way, one's happy all the time. Maybe if one's practices, you know what I mean? There were a few times where...
I don't know if he said that, but I think I know what you're referring to.
Yeah.
I don't know that well, the thing is if one's practicing correctly, one doesn't need to be happy all the time. You know, in the sense of that there's a degree of clarity that, and generally that's even how we perceive like happiness is somehow this kind of ecstatic, gratification that we're getting our money's worth out of our practice. But there's I think there's just that degree of clarity and maybe well-being is a much better guide to that sense of there's this underlying kind of well-being and clarity, rather than sort of I'm being constantly gratified and happy. I'm happy.
I what I took from it, what Payutto was referring to, and the one part I think you're asking about is like the image of Ajahn Chah saying like it's like his practice was like eating these like spicy leaves. And it's like you're crying and your nose is running, but you can't stop eating them because they taste so good. I think of it like that because you've got in a way you love the practice even if it's suffering.
Yeah, that's Ajahn Chah actually sort of says, sometimes it's mixed up with the suffering and the difficulty are sort of mixed up in that together, but it's somehow engaging one in a way that one is really wants to continue. Yeah, his example of it's just that's really hot and spicy, and your snot's running, and your tears are flowing, but it just tastes so good.
I think that's why they have a dish called Silo Hai, type of tea. Silo Hai.
Also, depending on our own past karma, some people's practice is really easy and joyful and happy, and other people's practice is difficult and painful. And sometimes
and then the Buddha
point
actually points to that.
But that there's the potential for release no matter whether it's very painful or very pleasurable or somewhere in between. The potential is always there for release.
I don't know about, happiness or delighting in, but I'm like, what really resonated for me, one thing was in the book Siddhartha, how when he met the Buddha, he walked away because he didn't want anything given to him, or he wanted to know what it was like to figure it out. And for me that really resonated, and my kind of engineering background is, to me, this is just like the ultimate problem to be solved. And figuring out how the mind works. It's not that it's easy, but there is an enjoyment in that process of understanding.
Yeah, and for it to be, and I think that's kind of the the Buddha's say, I can only point out the way, and you gotta figure it out.
But if I didn't enjoy figuring it out,
Yeah.
I'd see how this would be more torturous. I mean, still,
Yeah.
even the enjoying figuring it out does not preclude that it's not, for me, physically often quite difficult.
Yeah.
Or giving up is also difficult, but seeing the results and learning from those results is delightful.
Yes.
So it's not mono, it's not one or the other, it's it's a spectrum.
There's a spectrum of experience that is comes out on the plus side.
Yeah, I guess maybe he seems to be speaking really a great thrust of the difference between craving and chanda, But yeah, something that just kept coming up for me over and over again was the disparity between the sort of Kuba Ajahns' accounts of their practice and their experiences along the way. Except Ajahn Dun. Ajahn Dun, it sounded like it was pretty smooth sailing. But besides that, it sounded like there was periods where it wasn't very pleasant, where there wasn't a lot of happiness. And so this idea of it being a bit more complex than that.
Yeah, and I think it's important to or realistic to recognize it. But even within that, as Tunku Danyu was saying, that's even when there is difficulty, there's a certain satisfaction in, say, like rising to the challenge. One feels that it's. I think that's one of the things with the stories of the Krupa Ajahns, as difficult as it is for them or for anybody. There's a kind of confidence that this is kind of a way through, or a confidence in the teachers, like Ajahn Tonglat being, going back to Ajahn Mun. He's already had a bunch of difficulty in his practice, and he's starting to get some confidence in the practice, and goes back to see Ajahn Mun. Ajahn Mun sends him off to this cave where the monks keep dying there, and he said no, and Ajahn Mun says go off there for 3 years, don't come back. And he was, oh no, God, no, not there. Is there anywhere else I can go? He says, no, that's it. And so he's kind of despairing, but then he goes and does it, and he comes back. Well, after he comes back from that, Ajahn Mun sort of comment to him or encouragement to him. He says, "Yeah, your mind and my mind are the same."